Okay, good morning. My name is Elaine Trahan. I'm a professor in the Department of English here, and I'm co-PI of Silicon with Tom Mullaney, though it's important for me to tell you that everything that goes well is because of Tom Mullaney's incredible amount of effort. And he's astonishing to work with, as I'm sure many of you already know, and it's a pleasure to work on this project. So I'm very pleased to be chairing this first session. And we're just going to get straight down to business. We have 3 speakers, one of whom will come in online. And kicking off proceedings, so no pressure, setting a high bar will be Bridget Chase, who's going to talk to us about Typotheque, Indigenous North American type research. Bridget, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no pressure kicking things off, hey? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Bridget Chase, and I feel very honored to be here this morning presenting on behalf of Typotheque and the Indigenous North American Typography Project. Our team is a group of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks who are experts in Indigenous language technologies and typography. And we are working in collaborative initiatives and partnerships with Indigenous communities across North America to investigate and resolve issues that come alongside encoding, keyboards, fonts, and other technical barriers that Indigenous communities face when accessing their language in digital spaces. Everyone in the room knows that when it comes to access to technology, some languages are more equal than others. And issues that present themselves with encoding, adequate keyboards, and access to accurate and respectful typographic representation of glyphs really restrict communities' ability to use their language in day-to-day digital spaces. And so our team is working to help resolve these issues while also researching and documenting the encoding, keyboard, and typographic preferences that each Indigenous community in North America has for their unique language. So North America is an incredibly diverse place, and that is true both linguistically as well as orthographically. Within a single language, there are often many varieties, or what some people may refer to as dialects, and each of these varieties can often use a different writing system. This type of diversity is something that should be celebrated, and that celebration should extend to ensuring that all writing systems are equally accessible and visually represented within technology. So before we get into some of the modern issues that communities are facing, it's important first to talk about where Indigenous writing systems originated from and how that impacts where we're at today. So when it comes to Indigenous languages across the continent, a lot of writing systems have a colonial history. It was often missionaries, anthropologists, and linguists that came into communities attempting to document the unique sounds of Indigenous languages by using a settler writing system like English or French as the basis. But that's kind of like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And so where we're at today, especially over the last 30 years, is a lot of communities are in the process of reclaiming ownership and decision-making for their orthographies. This looks like modifying existing scripts as well as creating entirely new ones. And these processes are being led by language champions and community experts. Often, communities have language authorities, which are governing bodies within a community who engage in traditional protocol and decision-making regarding their languages. And so our team at Typotheque works in active collaboration with these community leaders to support them in ensuring that their orthographies can be accurately and respectfully represented in digital spaces. And how do we do that? Well, as mentioned, we develop partnerships that start with a memorandum of understanding with communities to understand the issues that they're facing and to establish a baseline of working respect of how we're going to work together. And this starts with developing an agreement based on principles of data sovereignty. So we follow the First Nations principles of OCAP, ownership, control, access, and possession. And these principles guide our work with community to ensure that Everything that we're researching and all the resources that we're developing are completely controlled and owned by their respective communities. We believe, above all else, that Indigenous data sovereignty is a key and critical part of this type of work. And that includes communities having self-determination over how, where, and to whom this kind of data can be accessed and used. So what are the core types of issues that communities are facing? Well, in order to make any sort of more complex technological advancements, whether that be addition to CLDR, the development of speech to text, addition or inclusion within government systems like birth registries, there are 3 baseline things that communities need to ensure full and complete access to. And that's access to a full Unicode representation of their orthography, access to functional and thoughtfully designed keyboards, and access to typefaces that accurately and respectfully render those orthographies. If these 3 core pillars aren't met, then it's very difficult to make sort of further, more complex technical advancements. And so this is where we start in all of our partnerships. So let's start with Unicode. If an orthography isn't fully encoded, then it's pretty much a failure to launch for any further projects. So luckily, our team has lots of experience in working to develop successful Unicode proposals. Previously, we worked with the Typotheque community in Nunavut to develop a Unicode proposal for Unicode 14 and added 12 missing syllabic characters to the Unicode standard. And more recently, we worked with the Heiltsuk community in Bella Bella, British Columbia, to add 2 of their missing capital letters to the Unicode standard that was just published, Unicode 16, in September of 2024. Now, I'm going to take a drink of water, and you can all look at this long timeline. It takes a while for these things to be done, especially if they need to be done right, which they do. And so our team works closely in collaborative partnership to go through the process of developing a successful Unicode proposal. And as I mentioned, as of September 2024, the new characters for Heiltsuk were published in Unicode 16. But unfortunately, as of right now, of course, we've taken the community as far as we can on our own when it comes to encoding access. And it's up to the big 3 operating systems to then implement that access into the technology. And as of the time of this presentation, those characters, unfortunately, haven't been implemented within any of the big 3 operating systems. So the Heiltsuk community is still waiting for that, and we're very hopeful that that will be happening as soon as possible in 2025. The other issue that communities often run into when it comes to Unicode is what we like to call confusable characters. So, the average person doesn't know anything about Unicode. They just open up their phone, they open up their computer, and they start typing. But what that means is that over the course of, the last few decades of communities digitizing materials and working to document their languages, we are seeing a lot of instances where multiple visually similar but technically different code points have been used for one single character. And these confusables, which I've put up a few examples here you can see, cause major issues in the long term when it comes to having standardized and consistent data that can be then used to develop things like keyboards, fonts, and other pieces of technology. When you have a mixture of different code points used for a single character, and all of those are then mixed within a large corpora of language data, it makes it also very difficult to develop tools that are then searchable, indexable, alphabetizable, and that work in a consistent way. So having a standardized set of code points for a particular language's orthography is another thing that our team can help support communities with. And then once Unicode issues are resolved, we can move on to keyboards. And so continuing with our Heiltsuk narrative, we supported the Heiltsuk community in updating all of the keyboards that were in active use within the community with those new capital letters. And that included mobile keyboards for iOS and Android that are deployed via the Keyman app. It includes desktop keyboards for Windows and Mac OS, also on the Keyman software, as well as direct key layout files that are used within the community. And it includes the Google Chrome plugin so that you can use the keyboard on Chromebooks, which are very popular in sort of school and work settings. So doing these updates in themselves is quite an extensive process, and it involves asking a lot of questions and ensuring that the community is directing the sort of work and providing the feedback to ensure that keyboards are designed in a successful and adequate way for adoption by users. And when you're developing a keyboard from scratch, there are even more questions that need to be asked. And so, as an example, a number of years ago, I was working with a community in BC that didn't have a keyboard, so we had to build one from scratch. And upon my first draft of the keyboard, I put in all of the characters for their orthography into the key layout, and I didn't include any characters that weren't in their orthography, and that included an F. There was no F glyph in their language. But upon beta testing that keyboard, I got feedback from an elder who said, and I quote, "There might not be an F in my language, but there is an F in Facebook." And the process of having to switch back and forth between his language keyboard and the English language keyboard using sort of this third-party software was really cumbersome. And so the community in that sense directed me to include the English language characters that they needed access to be able to do basic things like browse the internet. However, I've also worked with communities who have very strong opinions about not having any characters outside of their language incorporated within their technology. So these are all examples of things that need to be community directed, and you need to know the types of questions to ask to make sure the right decisions are made. And that's, again, one of the things that our team can help to do. And then also when it comes to keyboards, you have to think about where they're found and how they're installed. So as I'm sure all of you know, as of right now, the vast majority of Indigenous language keyboards are not available first party within operating systems. You need to have a multi-step installation process to be able to access them. And this can be done directly via a key layout file, but that process does require some kind of technical understanding. And so for those who may not have a strong technical background, that process might be a barrier to entry. And on the other side, you could use a third-party software, something like Keyman, where that multi-step installation process might be a little bit more accessible, but then people hit barriers to access when it comes to installing third-party software on work or school laptops that may have restrictions. And so a lot of communities are at the stage now where they're very interested in having their keyboards integrated first-party into operating systems. But that process of facilitating those conversations with big tech companies can be, a drain on capacity. It can be very complex. And unfortunately, there are groups that have had difficulties or challenges in working with big tech and liaising. And so this is another piece that, our team here can help with, being a liaison, both through the Unicode proposal process and also with tech companies to have keyboards eventually adopted into first-party operating systems. And then last but not least, we have typeface access. So once the Unicode and keyboard issues are resolved, we can ensure that typefaces are available that will accurately and respectfully render those orthographies and the preferences that the communities have. So Typotheque, as a typeface foundry, has a whole plethora of beautiful typefaces to work with. And so continuing the story of our Heltzik collaboration, we then updated 5 of the Typotheque typefaces to not only incorporate the new characters, but also to take into consideration the typographic preferences that communities have for their language. And these sorts of preferences are really important because it helps to make sure that the font not only looks good, but also that it works. And so there are a number of technical issues that can arise during the font design process if an understanding of the writing system and of community preferences aren't taken into consideration. Things like positioning of diacritics. Often we see in even major fonts, diacritics kind of end up floating off into the ether when they needed to be stacked or positioned on top of characters. And even if the stacking and positioning of diacritics does work, we often see issues with shaping. And so as an example, in the Celtic language, they use two different combining comma above code points to represent different sounds. And so if those two code points aren't shaped differently, it becomes visually impossible for a speaker to read a word and to know what sound that code point is intending to represent. And so again, all of this kind of knowledge and information are things that we work with communities to understand, and we're documenting in hopes of developing an open source database of this information. Lastly, even if all of the shaping and positioning and stacking works correctly, if the font doesn't have the proper font height boundary encoded within the file, the characters get the chop, and that's not what we want to see either. And so the collaborative process that we go through with communities is one of consultation and feedback. You can see here an example of a survey that was posted in a Typotheque community school where we surveyed teachers about their preferences for design and shaping of their syllabics glyphs. And then those preferences were recorded, documented, and used to then update fonts to better reflect the unique identity of the script of this language. And this is a process that we go through with care, and all of that feedback is community directed. It's also important to note that the typefaces that are modified or adapted or developed through this process are then provided to the community for free to use in perpetuity for whatever they want. So we're not in the business of doing this research and work to try and gather information to then develop typefaces to sell back to the community. All of the work that we're doing is a reciprocal and collaborative in nature. And, as I mentioned, our big picture goal is to develop an open source database that shares with the broader public the results of this research and the information about the preferences that we're learning through this work. So as we work with communities, we are documenting, as I mentioned before, their encoding practices, what kind of code points they're using, their keyboard sources, their typographic preferences for their orthography, and other technical issues that they may be facing. And of course, because we build OCAP and data sovereignty practices into all of the relationships that we have and the agreements that we make, it means that all of the information we're gathering and adding into this database has been community approved, not only that it's correct, but also that it's been allowed for public consumption. So this takes the onus off of communities to do this work over and over again with everybody that approaches them, from software developers, tech companies, font designers, asking them these questions over and over, and instead puts the onus on the organizations to access the available community-approved research that we're gathering. You can visit our website to see information about the types of research and information that will be publicly available through this project. You can also see more details about the project and read the memorandums of understanding that we have with our existing community partners. And of course, it's very important to note that all of the resources that we develop through these processes will continue to be owned and operated by the communities themselves. We're not gatekeepers or key holders to this information, and we want to make sure that the power and control continues to be held by the communities themselves. So you might be wondering, how are we funding this? Well, Typotheque sells retail typefaces to people around the world. We sell books, we sell merchandise, and we have the Typotheque Club, which is a crowdfunding tool. 50%, 50, of all of the profits that Typotheque makes every year go into working on Indigenous language research and community support. And so what that means is that none of the cost goes onto community. All of this work is done for free for them. But what that also means is that we need support in having external funding to be able to scale this work out and do this research. So if you are a member of an organization, a company, an institution that is looking to benefit from this type of research, we would love to talk to you more. Please come and find me. Please come and find me, and let's chat about how we can collaborate together. To wrap up, I'll say this. The issues that communities are facing when it comes to accessing technology are no longer based in technical limitations. They're predominantly based in resourcing, capacity, and bureaucratic and political issues. And so I believe that if we all collectively work together to support communities in ensuring linguistic access and diversity in our technology systems, we can contribute to the larger puzzle of language revitalization, resourcing, capacity, and Indigenous cultural vitality. Thank you very much.